Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Amna Gul from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. We're back with the course Communication Theories 2, bearing the code GMC 312. It's our 19th lecture, and the topic today is Major Categories of Communication Theory. So we'll be just discussing the major categories of mass communication theory, and this is something very, very important, and you need to pay a lot of attention to this particular topic. Social scientists, both physical or social, however narrowly or broadly defined, deal in theory. Theories are stories about how and why events occur. This is a very simple but yet a very compelling definition, and I actually tend to like this one when we are just referring to the concept of theory. Different schools of thought will define theory in different ways depending on the needs of the theorists or their beliefs about social world and the nature of knowledge. Scholars have identified four major categories of communication theory. The first one is postpositivism. Second is cultural theory. Third, critical theory. And fourth, normative theory. And although they share a commitment to an increased understanding of social and communicative life and a value for high quality scholarship, these four major categories of communication theory differ in, number one, their goals, that what is their goal for understanding the world or what is their goal towards it. The second is their ontology, which is their view of the nature of reality, or what is knowable and worth knowing. That is their ontology. Now, this is something very, 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 very much important. That, for example, dependent on what certain scientists believe is the nature of reality, or what is knowable, what is worth knowing, on the basis of that, we have divided communication theory into certain major categories. Here, I would like to share a video that discusses ontology a bit more, but for your level, currently, I expect you to only understand that ontology is basically the nature of reality or what is knowable. This is all I want you to keep in mind, but still I want to share a video that certainly that explains it a bit more. Here we go.
Ontology is interested in addressing the question, what is reality? There are several ontologies that exist. For the purposes of this video, I will use these three ontologies. Firstly, the belief that there is only one single reality or truth. Secondly, the belief that there are multiple realities. Thirdly, that reality is constantly negotiated, debated, or interpreted.
See, so ontology is about the nature of reality, and in the video there are three types of realities being discussed. One is that there is only one reality, okay, that there is only one truth about a particular thing. The second is there can be multiple truths about something. The third one was that reality is actually relative. It is the truth changes with, for example, it can change with circumstances, it can change from time to time, dependent on that. So, for example, if I were to tell you about ontology a bit more, we can, for example, relate it to the physical world. For example, whatever we know about the universe, about our solar system, about Earth, about weight, about water, about ozone layer, all these things are based on the ontology that there is only one true reality. Most of these things are based on this ontology, okay? But say that is not communication theory, okay? This was most of these are about physical world. But in communication theory, there is the possibility that the ontologies differ because people view the nature of reality differently. For example, I'll ask you, what do you perceive? For example, if given open chance to do your paper in offline exam environment in the classroom, and you are given you have a lot of freedom to practice things that are not allowed, so would you or would the students practice go for malpractices? Is there any one single answer to that? Are there multiple answers to this thing? Or the answer is relative? It can change from depending on certain circumstances. So on the basis of this is where ontology comes in, how the scientists view the nature of reality. Okay? Now moving on to the next, which is epistemology. The scientists' view of the methods used to create and expand knowledge. That is their epistemology. That is how knowledge is created and expanded. Now, this again is another debate. But still, I want you to understand only this much that is written on the slide, that is there for you, that what epistemology is. It is about the creation and expansion of knowledge, how it is done. Still, once again, I would like to share a video with you that explains it a little bit further. So let's start with epistemology. What does the video say?
With epistemology, we'll go from general to specific. This is a branch of philosophy that studies knowledge or knowing. They ask questions like, how do we know what we claim to know? That's the classic epistemological question that you'll see in a lot of theory and research textbooks. A researcher might assume, for example, that knowledge is already out there just waiting to be discovered. And so it's our job as researchers to uncover this universal, unchanging, and absolute truth. In contrast, other researchers believe that people develop knowledge based upon how they perceive the world and through their experiences. That's how we create knowledge.
See, once again, now there can be different epistemological assumptions. Once again, this is why there are different major categories of communication theory based on these certain things.
Still further along this spectrum is the relativistic view that believes that knowledge is a social construction. In essence, whatever we treat as knowledge is knowledge. There is no universal or absolute truth. These are epistemological positions that are getting at this notion of knowledge. But like I said, most researchers don't spend many paragraphs in each given journal article spelling all of this out. They normally just get on with their work. But their research will leave clues. And I see that epistemology is most evident in the methods that they use to conduct their research. In other words, if they assume an objective reality, objective knowledge exists out there, then they will approach it that way. For instance, some organizational researchers do climate surveys. These are quantitative surveys driven by a statistical analysis. And the idea here is that if you ask the right questions, you'll get reliable and valid answers. And the results are meant to give you a snapshot of how things really are. In other words, there's an objective reality out there, and our survey is trying to show it. In contrast, there are other ways to get at knowledge, other beliefs about the best way to know something. For example, the ethnographic method believes that to really understand, to really know, you have to experience something for yourself. You can't study culture from the ethnographic standpoint, for example, from a distance. First-hand knowledge gained through experience is the best way to know. These are epistemological kinds of issues.
So you just saw that even in case of epistemology, there is not one single standpoint. There are different views about it, how knowledge is created and how knowledge can be expanded. Okay. Having said that, now let's move towards the fourth difference that these major categories differ in, that is Exology. The view of the proper role of human values in research and theory building, that is their Exology. Now, once again, you just need to remember that Exology is just the role of values in research and theory building. But still, once again, there is some more that I would like to share with you about it so that you get a bit detailed understanding of the view. So here we go.
Talk about Axology. Again, we'll go from general to specific. This is a branch of philosophy that studies values. They ask questions about the values that guide our research to begin with. For example, what do we consider to be good or bad, right or wrong, beautiful or not? What do we value? Another axiological issue is what values might result from or be the outcome of our research. Axology often asks questions about the extent to which our research can be totally neutral, or does our researcher opinion come into play and our personal values shape how we conduct and write up our research? Also, should our research be seeking merely to understand what we are studying, or should we be studying something with the goal of changing society for the better? That's an axiological question. And if we want to change society, what do we consider better? In other words, what do we value? Would it be more economic equality, better health, deeper relationships? These are all axiological issues. Sometimes researchers and writers are pretty obvious about this, but not always. Martin Buber.
So you see, role of value is very, very much important. So far, you might have studied in your research classes that scientific method research is just objective, but it's not like that. There are certain ways, certain perspectives are that the true that they do go for objectivity. They do not want researchers' values in it, but there are other point of views, other schools of thought that take their Exology is actually the kind of welcome researchers' perspective into the research. For example, as we just saw in the ethnographic method. So these differences, these four differences that I've just highlighted, goals, ontology, epistemology, and exology, these differences not only define the different types of theory, but they also help make it obvious why a broader and more flexible definition of social science in mass communication theory is useful. Now let's move towards postpositivist theory. When researchers first wanted to systematically study the role of mass media in social world, they turned to the physical sciences for their model. Obviously, whatever was being practiced earlier, so simply since there were more researchers in the physical sciences earlier, so when the trend came towards role of mass media in the social world, they looked towards what was prevalent in the physical sciences as a model for research. Those in the physical sciences, for example, physics, chemistry, astronomy, and the list goes on, believed in positivism. The idea that knowledge could be gained only through empirical, observable, measurable phenomena examined through the scientific method. But as we discussed earlier as well in this lecture, in the previous lecture rather, the social world is very different from the physical world. Causality needs to be understood and applied differently. After a century of trial and error, like there was a full century of research, or trial and error research, social scientists committed to the scientific method developed post-positivist theory. This type of theory is based on empirical observation guided by the scientific method, but It recognizes that humans and human behavior are not as constant as elements in the physical world. Now, this thing is an excellent way of going about things. See, they actually went, if you understand post-positivism, it is post means after. So it came after positivism, okay? It embraced the concepts of positivism, but added something more to it. It accepted that it is based on empirical observation, guided by scientific methods, but there is one more thing to it. It recognizes that humans and human behaviors are not as constant as elements in the physical world. Elements in the physical world, for example, water, it is always H2O, or the boiling point at sea level is always 100 degrees centigrade. So it is a constant thing. Fine. Human behavior is not the constant. You give me chocolate today, I might be happy. You give me chocolate tomorrow, I might not be happy about it. Fine. So, for example, your pocket money 5 years back was, let's suppose 500 rupees. So, the same 500 rupees pocket money today, and you'll be so upset about it. Like, what is it? It doesn't even fulfill my cellular services payments. See, so 5 years back, you might be okay and rather be happy about a 500 rupees pocket money. 5 years back, what was it? 2014, 16, you might not be happy even then. Let it be 10 years back. I know 10 years back, 500 rupees pocket money, weekly basis was a good enough opportunity, I guess, was a good enough offer, I guess. So I don't know. I actually don't really know what your financial statuses are, but kind of these things that previously 10 years back you might not be have been owning a cell, and thus and you might not be traveling on your own to your higher education institutions. So obviously you did not need to spend so much on your own. But currently things are different, so you might be upset about it. So things are not constant in the social world. Okay. Having said that, now the goals of post-positivist theory are the same as those set by physical scientists for their theories, which are explanation, prediction, and control. For example, researchers who want to explain the operation of political advertising predict which commercials will be most effective and control the voting behavior of targeted citizens would of necessity rely on post-positivist theory. So if someone wants to explain, predict, and control the voting behavior in these circumstances related to political advertising, so they might rely on post-positivist theory. Now, its goal, we explained, is explanation, prediction, and control. Its ontology accepts that the world, even the social world, exists apart from our perceptions of it. Human behavior is sufficiently predictable to be studied systematically. Post-positivists do, however, recognize that the social world does have more variation than the physical world. For example, the names we give to things define them and our reaction to them. Hence, that is why there is the post of post-positivism, as I discussed earlier as well. So, what is the goal? Their goal is to explain, predict, and control. The ontology is that human behavior is sufficiently predictable. Okay, ontology was the nature of reality. So they kind of feel that human behavior is sufficiently predictable. So there are not much diversities into it. Okay, that is the nature of reality. Its epistemology argues that knowledge is advanced through the systematic logical search for regularities and causal relationships among the scientific method. Advances come when there is intersubjective agreement among scientists studying a given phenomenon. That is, post-positivists find confidence in the community of social researchers, not in any individual social scientist. So what happens is actually that they go for epistemology is how knowledge is created and expanded. So actually they do not rely on the researches of one single person. In case of a theory of gravity, who gave the theory of gravity? Similarly, E is equal to mc square and other things. But in case of post-positivism, it's the same thing. They go for that when members of a research community independently arrive at similar conclusions about a given social phenomena, that is intersubjective subjective agreement. That is, different researchers studying the same phenomena give the same result about whatever that phenomena is, but they're studying that independently. They're not working together, okay? And they all the community comes up with the same thing, so obviously they call it that. That is actually the epistemology. Okay, now moving towards Exology. It is this cautious reliance on the scientific method that defines post-positivism's Exology. The objectivity inherent in the application of the scientific method keeps researchers and theorists' values out of the search for knowledge as much as possible. They actually post-positivists fear that values could bias the choice and application of method, so that researchers would be more likely to get the results that they want, the results that are consistent with their values. So let's look back at it. What is it? The goal of post-positivist theory is explanation, prediction, and control. Its ontology, which was the nature of reality, is that human behavior is sufficiently predictable to be studied systematically. It's epistemology, which is how knowledge is created and expanded. Epistemology is that they find confidence in the community of social researchers, not in any individual social scientist. This is known as intersubjective agreement. I'll put up this definition in the next slide. Don't worry for that. Okay, and then Axology, which was the role of value in research. So it goes for objectivity. There is no room for researchers' values, researchers' bias, researchers' preferences in post-positivism. So this was something about it. In the next slide, I'll give you the definitions. Post-positivist theory, post-positivist communication theory then is theory developed through a system. Okay, the first one is post-positivist theory based on empirical observations guided by the scientific method. Okay, and what was intersubjective agreement? When members of a research community, different members, independently, the most important term here is that they do it independently, they arrive at similar conclusions about a given social phenomena, then it is called intersubjective agreement, and that was the epistemology of post-positivism. Okay, here I would like to share with you a video about post-positivism. I hope it explains things a bit more in detail for you. Let's go watch it. Please listen to it in detail.
Wondering what post-positivism is? You've come to the right place. Let's dig in. As the name suggests, post-positivism came after something called positivism, so you may want to check out the positivism video as well for more context. But let's suffice it to say that post-positivism is a philosophical perspective arising in the second half of the 20th century, which critically revised the prevailing understanding among scientists that reality outside of oneself can be objectively observed and recorded, resulting in full understanding of that reality. There came a point where this view of the world and knowledge creation as orderly and predictable was criticized as being out of line with lived experience, the history of scientific discovery, and new findings in physics. These critiques shaped a new perspective, that of postpositivism, that did not fully reject positivist understandings, but modified them. Postpositivism moved from the naive realism of positivism, which believed in fully and objectively apprehending reality outside of oneself, towards a critical realism, which still embraced an understanding of reality outside of the knower, but instead sought to partially and probabilistically apprehend that external reality.
This is very much important that we understand that we cannot, in case of post-positivism. Positivism said that anything can be fully understood. Post-positivism says it can be partially understood. So that is something very much important in this.
So instead of saying, through observation and experimentation, I can fully understand the reality of this forest, like a positivist, the post-positivist might say, through observation and experimentation, I can gain knowledge of this forest that is highly probable, though could in the future be falsified through further investigation.
See the difference? So positivists, they kind of feel that they get full understanding of the whole phenomena, while the post-positivists, they are actually probable about their assumption, about whatever their findings are, and there is always room those findings can be challenged in future through different if circumstances change, or different studies that come in, or different elements that are then reconsidered into the research process. So there is always room for that more can be known about that particular phenomena under study.
The first major figure in post-positivism was Karl Popper, who positioned himself against the logical positivism of the Vienna Circle and Wittgenstein, which is discussed in the Positivism video. For Popper, the process of falsification is central. Rather than understanding science as an inductive process, where observing a result over and over and over a bunch of times meant that you could conclude it was a universal truth or principle, Popper aligned himself with a number of philosophers, including David Hume and Bertrand Russell, in pointing out that just because something happens a bunch of times does not mean it will happen every time. Rather, Popper presented science as a deductive process in which a researcher deduces a proposition from their hypothesis and then attempts to prove that deduction wrong. If it is not proven wrong, even when everyone in the scientific community is given the chance to try hard to do so, it can be accepted as provisionally true. While Popper got the post-positive train rolling out of the station, he was replaced in the driver's seat by Thomas Kuhn, scholar and author of the seminal book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which argues that scientific knowledge has not been accumulated neatly. Rather, Kuhn documents the messy historical and sociological development of scientific knowledge, which is marked, as he observes, by significant paradigm shifts, in which one overarching worldview suddenly gives way to another. This process is demonstrably not objective or detached, but rather integrates many influences, including human ones. Post-positivist thought grew in response to and built on findings in physics, particularly those of Werner Heisenberg and Niels Bohr. Heisenberg's quantum theory includes the uncertainty principle, stating that it is impossible to figure out both the momentum and the position of a subatomic particle. Where is that little electron going? We can't predict. And that the very act of observing the particle alters it, making prediction impossible, and challenging positivism's assumptions about knowledge or its epistemology. Bohr, on the other hand, challenged positivism's assumptions about reality, its ontology, by asserting that subatomic particles are inherently different from previously observed and understood reality, opening up the possibility of reality that cannot be objectively and positively known. As complex, even chaotic findings such as these continue to emerge in physics and other areas of science, the post-positivist perspective has seemed increasingly relevant as an alternative to positivism as a basis for scientific inquiry.
Hope you found that video interesting and educational. Now, whenever evaluating post-positivist theory, we need to ask certain questions. See, whenever you're going through any theories, so if it is a post-positivist theory, you need to ask certain questions. How well does this theory explain the event, behavior, or relationship of interest? How well does it predict future events, behaviors, or relationships? How testable it is. In other words, is it specific enough in its assertions that it can be systematically supported or rejected based on empirical observation? How parsimonious is it? In other words, is it the simplest explanation possible of the phenomena in question? Some call this elegance as well. Okay, keep in mind that communication theories generally tend to lack parsimony. In fact, one of the reasons many social scientists avoid the study of communication is that communication phenomena are hard to explain parsimoniously. Parsimony is like simple with very few words, using the simplest explanation. Finally, how practical or useful is it? If the goals of post-positivist theory are explanation, prediction, and control, how much assistance towards these ends is provided by the theory? That's all for today. Found it useful. This is once again stating this is a very important topic. You need to put in a lot of attention and work on it. That's all for today. Thank you.